Hello there, my name is David Pstansky and welcome to the Extreme Improv Podcast Skills Show. Now, the Extreme Improv Podcast is available on iTunes and Spreaker and Podbean and Google Podcasts and Spotify. So if you're listening to this through one of those platforms, please take a moment to subscribe. We also have lots of other weekly shows, including Extreme Improv Radio Rumble, which is our weekly comedy show, and the Extreme Improv Podcast Chat Show, where we interview people, mostly improvisers, comedians and such like, each and every week. But the Skill Show is all about talking and discussing skills, games, techniques and everything that you need to perform successful improvisation. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the improv game known as Questions Only, or as we play it in Extreme Improv, Question Battle and any of its variations. So if you don't know the game, the way it works is everything you say in a scene has to be a question. So if there was going to be someone write down all of the dialogue from the scene, every time a character speaks, the dialogue should end in a question mark. There shouldn't be a single full stop used in the scene. It should always be sentences that would end in a question mark. And I say that just because some people will play this and they might do like a whole paragraph or like a mini monologue and then just have a question at the end of it. Or they might answer a question and then ask a question afterwards. And that's not how it works. Everything you say has to be a question without exception. Now, you can get around it by having things that wouldn't normally seem like they're a question become a question just through the intonation of your voice. We'll get into that in a little bit. But to begin with, the very basics of it. So, who, what, when, why, where, or how. If you say any of these words as the first word that you say in a sentence, they will usually end up as a question. Now, it's quite possible, but I can't think of an example right now, that there might be a way where you can say one of these words to make a sentence. I might try and think of one in a minute, but I'll probably get stuck. And then you'll be screaming at the radio box. Sorry, this is a bit old school of me, but you'll be screaming at wherever you're listening through your Alexa or your iPhone or what have you, that you can think of an example that I can't. But let me go through what those words were again. Who, what, when, why, where, how, if, usually. So who are you? Who is going to do this? Who's hiding under my bed, etc., etc. These are all questions. What's up? What's for dinner? What's for breakfast? What's that sound? Etc., etc. Will all be questions. When are we going out? You get the idea. Why are we going out? Who, what, when, why, where are we going out? How are we going out? If we go out, can I do this? Or can I go to this? That's another good word. Can. That will often end up in a sentence unless you're saying can of beans. But when I was talking about intonation earlier, I could say can of beans? And suddenly that becomes a question because do you have a can of beans? Can of beans, the response to it, you were questioning. So you could go up to someone, and this is talking about intonation, and you could be like, Mary? As if you're not sure that it's Mary. Or you recognise that, this is my long-lost friend from when I was a child. I think this is Mary. And you say, Mary? To question. But if you say, Mary, that sounds like you're about to start speaking to her, so that wouldn't be a question. Who killed the president? Mary, not a question. Who killed the president? Mary? And it's I'm not even sure I gave the right delivery there, but you get what I mean. So Mary, like you killed the president. You can make a name or something which isn't normally a question through the intonation of your voice. Now, a mistake people often fall into is they might say, what's your name? And then the response they will give will be, Tom, what's your name? And that's Tom, full stop, what's your name, question mark. So you can't say Tom. And obviously this isn't an example where someone could say to you, what's your name? And you go, Tom? Like you're not sure what your own name is. Like you could do that. But the reason why I would recommend against doing that is, and this always like to pepper these episodes with ideas that apply to lots of other areas of improv and like just general skills and general rules, is your character should know their own name. So unless you're going to introduce or it's been established that there's going to be something about amnesia or why your character wouldn't know who they are themselves, excuse me, yawning, then it doesn't make sense for your character to be questioning their own name. If you've just started a scene and someone says, like, are you Tom? And you're like, Tom? Then they would be like, don't you remember who you are? And then that might start to make sense. But people who end up doing it over and over again and doing it in multiple shows. So I'd say that's a habit to get out of. Just because you always need to think, what is the logic of the scene? What is the logic of the story? What would I know? Don't break your own continuity. I'll do an episode on your continuity, your universe within the scene, and how you have to like stick to it another time. But just briefly, if you're in a scene and there's things that you should know, then it's weird for you to question them or doubt them or have to explain them, like go into deep amounts of exposition. So, for example, it's like if you've got two siblings speaking in a scene and one of them says, well, maybe I could ask Dad. And I know it's not a question, but I'm just giving this example. And then the other one's like, you know, Dad died when we were 6. It's like, well, you just made both of you and the scene look silly, because why wouldn't the other character know that? You're just establishing a fact, but you're doing it at the expense of the logic of the scene. And coming back to questions only, it's very easy to do that. So you wouldn't question, it's like, are we going to run away, Mr. President? And then the next character says, am I the president? That's crazy. You know who you are. Don't do something like that. Another big tip I'll give for questions only is always make sure you use the space, because it's very easy with this game just to get very much in your head and just to be stood there talking. How are you? How are you? Shall we go out? Where would you like to go? And then the whole scene, I've spoken about this before, you're not moving the story on, you're literally just talking and like going round in circles. So always think, use the space, you know, mime things which will help give you inspiration for what to do in the scene, and move the story on. Now, the example I just briefly touched on there is, who are you? Who are you? Well, who are you? Well, who are you? It's good to vary the way you say things, but you don't want to give the same question back to the person you're playing with. So if someone says, what's your name? Don't just respond, well, what's your name? Because why would people do that unless they're like annoying 6-year-olds? People wouldn't do that. How do you then answer the questions and move on the scene? So this is the thing I always direct and teach people. Answer the question in your own head and ask the next logical question. So if someone says to me, what's your name? In my head, I can think David. And then there's loads of ways of answering it. You could say, if they say to you, what's your name? I think to myself, David. And I could say, don't you recognise me? Or, can you give me a D-A-V-I-D? And because I started it with a, can you give me a, I'm now spelling out my name. Where it's like, or you could say, don't you know they call me David? Or, you know, haven't you heard of the most electrifying man in the room, David? Or, you know, oh, I don't know if that might have been a statement rather than a question there, but you get what I mean. So there's lots of ways to answer it. What's your name? Do you really want to know? Or what's your name? Can you keep a secret? And then, you know, so that's just a little bit of a delaying thing, because they might then say, what's the secret? And then you, again, through acting through it, could be like, you know, don't you know I'm in disguise? It's like, and then you pretend to pull off a mask or a fake mustache, or it's, you know, you can say something like, can can you see it's David, and whatever. There's ways so that you don't just have to think, oh, what's your name? I have to say David, or whatever your name is, or your character's name. There is a way of making it so that you can build up to things a little bit. And that isn't just like delaying and not moving the scene on, but that's just like giving an aspect to it. You wouldn't go down the, oh, I'm in disguise route if it's just meant to be that you're at school or you're in a hospital, or you could do, but by the second or third time you've done this tactic, then it'll start to feel old to you and the other performers. So if a character says to you something, for example, of do you want to go to bed now? Then, that doesn't have to be that could just be for sleep kind of thing. It doesn't have to be like a sexual kind of thing, but it could be. But I'll try and answer in both ways. So do you want to go to bed now? You in your head, you think yes. You could then say, what time is it? And the next character could ask, is 6 p.m. too early? And then the next character then may say again, wouldn't you like to get dinner first? And like this, you now 3, 4, 5 sentences through this exchange without going around in circles of, do you want to go to bed now? Do you want to go to bed now? Why would I want to go to bed now? It's like, don't make the questioning everything that's being said the game that you're playing. You're still trying to perform the scene, trying to move on the story, but the restriction you've got is you can only speak in questions. What else is there to say about this game? So in Extreme Improv, we will play a question battle, as I alluded to earlier. And just to explain what a question battle is, it's a version of the game that I believe I invented, and it's only a version of the game, so I'm not taking credits for questions only overall. But with Extreme Improv, if you haven't seen one of our shows, as the director, I always like to put in new twists on games and create new games wholesale, and I'll speak about all of those and just about the idea of creating new improv games in another episode. But for a question battle, I like the idea of that you have 5 lives, and so you're allowed 5 mistakes in a scene. And once your performers are really, really good, you might end up putting a 2 or 3 minute time limit on it, because otherwise no one's ever going to lose. Because you can get that good at this game. And if you make a mistake, and the way in Extreme Improv we play the rules are, if you say anything that's not a question, you lose a life. If you have an extended an extended pause, then you lose a life. And if you have what we call a circular conversation, which is what I was just talking about there, what's your name? Well, what's your name? Well, what's your name? Stuff like that. Where is the chair? Can you see the chair? Is that the chair? Is the chair there? It's just like the story's not moving on. I will usually, if I'm emceeing it, give a circular conversation warning. And if it continues, then they lose a life. So circular conversation, extended hesitation, or saying something that's not a question, and then you will lose a life. And the way we demonstrate losing a life is by losing a limb. And so that will be that you tuck an arm behind your back, you end up hopping on one leg, and once you've lost 4 limbs, the last thing you lose, the 5th life, is you lose your head. And obviously you can't functionally demonstrate that once someone's on their knees with their arms tucked behind their back. They can't actually lose their head, so that signifies the end of the game. Another variation of this that, again, I think I may have invented, but I'm always interested. I don't want to be so bold to say that I've invented this, all of these, because I know that 2 people around the world might invent fire on the same day or within a week of each other and have no knowledge that the other caveman had invented fire. But if you believe you also invented this, then, reach out, let me know. But I may want to see proof, because I can prove that I came up with some of these games that I'll take credit for, going back years, because I've got a lot of video recordings of shows of when things debuted. So, let's see what other variations people have. So another variation is called questions and statements, and the other variation beyond that is statements only. questions and statements, the MC will just periodically go between saying questions only and statements only. And if it's statements only, or if you're playing a game of statements only, the rules are exactly the same, except for you're not allowed to ask questions at all, and everything you say has to be a statement. And so the other rule with statements only, and this is sort of unwritten rule. This is a rule to tell your performers, not to tell your audience necessarily. And the reason I say that, just to explain, is that sometimes you can bombard your audience with too many rules. So sometimes it's just the case that your performers need to know the rules so that the game will be more successful. And with statements only, the unwritten rule is there can be absolutely no pauses. And the reason I say that is because whilst we will tell the audience that you'll lose a life for hesitation, what would be acceptable pauses or hesitation within questions only makes statements only far too easy. So if you're doing statements only, it could be, there is the chair, I will sit in the chair, I hold a mirror, my reflection is grey, or whatever. And notice that it will quite sound monotone unless you're careful. So again, make sure things you're saying sound interesting. And if you even do it in that kind of slow delivery, it makes it very easy, and no one will ever lose a life. So you want to try to trick yourself. And by trick yourself, I mean, sorry, not trick yourself, trip yourself. You want to trip yourself up. You want to make it so that you're speaking really fast, and I don't mean like literally very fast like this. I just mean you don't want to leave any of these pauses. You want it so that you're, as a performer, going without thinking, and have this complete free flow where you're just going for it, because otherwise you're always going to be able to achieve doing statements only. The speed aspect will be fun for the audience. It will make it a bit more interesting and electrifying, that wow, they're really going for it. I'm finding it hard to keep track, but also that's why you don't speak so fast that they can't keep track. It's just you don't leave pauses, and that way you might genuinely make a mistake where you ask a question. Again, once you get too good at this, then you won't be achieving anymore, and by achieving, I just mean that you'll be overachieving. You'll be going so good that no one will ever go out. So that's why you put a time limit on things, and that's why I'll give this last piece of advice that sometimes if you're doing so well, you just have to think to yourself, well, do you know what? There's going to be an opportunity to get a laugh here. I just have to throw the fight. I just have to do something to go wrong, and the audience will know that I've done that, but the scene will just end. As with any of these slightly more competitive improv games, the big tip I'd say is do not do the rules of the game at the expense of making it an entertaining show. So if you're doing questions only or statements only, then technically you can always stay within the rules by doing things which I say will be a circular conversation or make it monotone or whatever, but try to make it entertaining at the forefront. So anyway, this was a short episode, and I may have actually kept it slightly shorter today, I'm not sure. No, not really, it's almost 20 minutes still. So who, what, when, why, where, how, can, if. These words will usually create a sentence that ends in a question mark. Try to avoid saying anything that will end in a full stop, so you can practice this, and when you're in your rehearsals, your workshops, whatever, or if you're just practicing out loud at home when you're cooking or whatever, it's a good way of doing a lot of these improv things. Just have a conversation with yourself, and you'll be able to get over I've hit a roadblock. What are tips and things I can say for myself when I hit this kind of stumbling block, when I hit this roadblock? What will get me out of that situation and the scene to continue? Anyway, I will probably do another episode on this game in the future, but for now, this has been the Extreme Improv Podcast Skill Show. My name is David Pstansky. I will just give a quick mention that this week, so if you're listening to this in the future and it's not like January 20th or whatever it is today, in 2020, then you can disregard this bit, but on Thursday, January 23rd, I believe, we have a live show at the Camden Comedy Club at 8 p.m. Tickets are available from our website, www.extremeimprov.co.uk. You can also just search Camden Comedy Club. We'll have tickets available on the door. We would love to have you there. We'll definitely play this game. If you've heard this podcast, give us a shout out. Shout out Skill Show or something like this. And I'll be like, yay, you listened. Because, we'd love to meet some of our subscribers and our listeners. Because you are the most important people for why we do this. Without you, there would be no show. Or there might be a show, but there'd be no point to having a show, because what's the point of doing it if no one's going to listen? There you go. So yeah, my name is David Pistansky. I'm on Twitter at David Pistansky. I'll spell it for you. It's Pustansky. And, of course, Extreme Improv has lots of podcasts. It has the Extreme Improv Radio Rumble, the Extreme Improv Podcast Skill Show, which is this one, and the Extreme Improv Podcast Chat Show, which drops every Thursday. Radio Rumble drops every Monday. And in addition to this, we have the Super Kick Mania Pro Wrestling Podcast, the Games Monster Video Game Podcast, the Mega Movie Podcast, and we'll soon be launching the Extreme Improv Podcast Book Club, which will be a nice little thing for you. We also have other live shows coming up, so check out the website for all of the dates. We're going to be at the Aylesbury Waterside Theatre. We're going to be at the Old Town Hall in Hemel Hempstead. We're going to be at the Brighton Fringe, at the Buxton Fringe, and loads of other places. The Cockpit Theatre we have just confirmed, so loads of stuff coming up. So until next time, please follow the Extreme Improv Facebook, Twitter, and all that stuff. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.